I always wondered why people don't change their beliefs when they're presented with thousands of facts to the contrary. So what is it that makes people double down on their own beliefs instead of changing their minds? So I thought I'd try to explain why some people accept the facts and others don't. But to really understand what is going on, we first need to understand all the amazing things the brain does for you to help you navigate the world. All humans have something called a schema, or mental model, as I refer to it in cognition and UX design, but it's also known as, you're familiar with, the world view that you have, how you perceive the world. When you were a child, you had a very large right hemisphere, which you used to create more connections so that you would be able to create your schemas, which you run on automatically, unconsciously, your routines, how you brush your teeth, etc. In my world of experience design, when I create apps and such, I call it the mental model that you have. But you're most familiar with it as your world view. For example, if you're liberal, you see people as either victims or the oppressor. And if you are a conservative, you're pro-family, and then you see people as equals. But as you grew older, you also had feedback loops that taught you what works in the world and what doesn't. So when you spoke to someone else and they reacted poorly, you got that as a feedback loop through your audio system that doesn't really work. You have 5 senses. You have audio, you have smell, you have visual, you have taste, then you have your senses, your touch, that gives you continuous feedback on what works and what doesn't work. For those who are antisocial and psychotic, they have troubles with their feedback loops and can therefore not shape their mental models as you normal people can. Normal people adjust to the world accordingly depending on their feedback loops. So for example, when you were a child and you didn't know how to walk, you tried and failed and you tried again. And the feedback loop in that instance was that you sort of felt a little pain, you know what didn't work, and then you tried again and you did something different until you managed to create those routines in your left hemisphere where your mental model schema or worldview resides. But you also created automatic, unconscious routine systems in your motor cortex, in the cerebellum, in the back of your head, that helps you efficiently move around in the world without engaging your consciousness. For example, you didn't know where your right thumb was pointing at before I asked you to check now. Now, did you? That's because you're 99.4% unconscious. But you also have other feedback loops, such as shame, guilt. Empathy is one of those feedback loops that is more prevalent in Westerners than in Asian people, because Asian people are collectivists and they don't need empathy to feedback into their own system how others feel. They know that family and the collective is more important, so they pay attention more than we do in the Western world. For each new experience that you had, you perfected your mental model or your worldview to what it is today. For example, if you lie to people, you expose yourself to a different world, where lying is your mental model and acceptable to you. Now that would put you in the dark tetrad spectrum of the hexagon model, which is contrary to the honest and humble part of personality. But if you were a good person and was honest and humble to other people, then you created and shaped a mental model for yourself or your worldview so that you were perceived in a different manner. Now, you're free to choose whatever, but you will show to others what you are, since your personality is the emperor's new clothes. And for those of you who don't know what the personality is, it is your behavior over time, which means that anyone can judge you and see what type of personality you have And it's quite simple and proven in science that you can do the hexaco test on anyone and be pretty close to the truth. Life isn't more complicated than that. You become what you expose yourself to. But that's sort of 40% of the truth, because your personality is more than 50% genetics, and it comes from your parent. And I have another video if you want to check that out about personality. Now, in reality, you don't have the ability to see another person's point of view. And the reason for that is because you haven't lived their lives, and you don't have the exact same connections in the brains and subsystems that they have. Therefore, you don't have the ability. Empathy is a feedback loop to help you and guide you sort of to understand what another person might be feeling, but you will never ever understand how it is to actually look out from their head and their eyes to observe you as you speak to them and try to understand them. Now, can you? So true empathy is something located in your right brain hemisphere. They have still not proven that the mirror neurons exist in the human brain, because it's not ethical to probe a human brain that deep to prove they exist. But the sort of hypothesis is that they are there, like they are in animal that we have tested it on. But what the right brain is doing, it's with its left eye watching other people's eye muscles, and the mirror neurons are trying to mimic that, not copy like the left hemisphere is doing with the mouth muscles. So the right hemisphere will unconsciously, without you even knowing it, it will try to mimic the facial expression around your eyes to match that of the person you're actually watching with your left eye. Now, the eye muscles are then connected to your limbic system, your emotional system. And that will then trigger the sort of emotion that you're trying to see in the other person. And that way, you at least have some ability to feel what the other person is going through and feeling right now. And that's one feedback loop that makes you a social human being. IQ is another sort of function or feedback loop that your brain uses to make you understand and navigate the world together with your mental model in your left brain. Your IQ is made up of crystalline IQ, which is your experience, your knowledge, your language, how you build words with letters, with numbers, how you calculate. All that what you store in your throughout education is your crystalline IQ. Then you have your fluid IQ. Fluid IQ is pattern recognition, how things implicitly stick together, how you understand nuances, how you see the world quickly and sort of adapt to it quickly. And the speed of that is also IQ. And the reason why you find that in your right hemisphere is because your right hemisphere has more myelin, fat, sort of overwrapping your axons and dendrites, which are the connections between your neurons in your brain. So when the brain signal goes through one soma, through the axon and then the dendrite into the next soma, the myelin helps the signal, the action potential, go faster. That's why the higher IQ you have, the quicker you will understand implicit patterns, pattern recognition, you will by definition then, as we measure it today, think that you are a smarter person. Now, for example, if you work in IT and you're a coder and developer, you need to be able to see many different patterns. If you have low IQ, sort of 98, well, the others that have, which you need to have when you're a developer, around 125 IQ, they will see that you don't understand what they're saying. You don't understand how many different ways you can code one thing. So that will cause cognitive friction. That is also why both men and women are attracted to partners with around 120 IQ. Here's a fun fact about the action potential, or your sort of brain signals and how your brain works. It's made up of sodium and potassium, and that's a connection that is done when the sodium atom passes through the cell membrane into the soma, the brain cell, that creates a sort of action potential, the brain signal. So when they say don't eat salt, well, your brain doesn't work if you don't eat salt, but you need the right equilibrium to make your brain function properly. Now, IQ, as Jordan Peterson liked to say, you're born with a number of IQ. Whether or not you reach that level of IQ is a different story. So IQ can be limited by drinking or consuming fluoride. It can also be limited by eating malnutrition food. So food with poor nutrition. So feeding your children candy will make them not as intelligent with age. And you peak around 25 years of age, and that is also how it stays for the rest of your life. As crystalline, your educational IQ goes up, your fluid IQ, the speed and the myelin breaks down, but on average, you stay the same. So fluid goes down with age and experience goes up. So you're quicker when you're younger, but you're more experienced as you're older. And that's basically how we define intelligence these days. But it's not the whole truth.
A central principle in Gestalt thinking allows us to perceive the world without overanalyzing every detail. This ability to quickly make sense of our environment is essential for survival. Imagine spending hours analyzing our surroundings, as our ancestors did, while animals would have devoured them in no time. So if you look at Unilever's logo, you can see that it is made up of small icons, but you see them as the letter U. In the case of the World Wildlife Organization, you see a panda and not blobs. Not so for those suffering from schizophrenia, since they have lost the ability to see things as a whole. Frankenstein's monster is one such explanation of schizophrenia. We naturally perceive shapes by filling in gaps between elements. This allows us to see the whole image first. Pay attention to how your brain is predicting an implicit pattern so that your brain can infer meaning to the things you're looking at. It is also simplification that your brain is doing so that it preserves your glucose or energy for other tasks. We perceive elements within the same closed region as belonging to the same group. Here you can see two groups of grey dots, one with a white background and one with a grey background. In the case of the mobile menu on iPhones, for the Watch app, you can see that the grouping affords you the impression of a menu. The continuity principle of Gestalt states that we group elements that seem to follow a continuous path in a particular direction. The human eye follows the path, lines, and curves of a design and prefers to see a continuous flow of visual elements rather than separate objects. The human eye continues to follow the path even if an obstacle hides it or its flow is broken by interlinking or bisecting visual elements. As you can see here, you have a line with a hand over it. So you perceive it as one continuous line. But when I remove my hand, you see that the lines are actually two different lines. But that's not how your brain is interpreting it. Proximity. We group close together elements and separate them from those far apart, which you can see by the three grey dots on the left side versus the three grouped dots on the right side. When images are ambiguous and present two or more meaningful interpretations, we experience the sensation of switching between them. We cannot see the multiple versions simultaneously, and this switching sensation is called multi-stability. My wife and my mother-in-law is a famous optical illusion that demonstrates multi-stability. Depending on where you focus, you might see either a young lady looking away or an elderly one looking sideways. Figure foreground. We dislike uncertainty since it triggers anxiety and neuroticism, so we look for solid, stable items. Unless an image is ambiguous like the Rubens vase. The Rubens vase is a classical illustration that demonstrates the principle of a figure ground and multi-stability. If you consider a black background, you see two faces looking at each other. And if you consider a white background color, you see a symmetrical vase in the foreground. This is good to remember when you do not understand what other people are describing to you. You see things differently. Invariance explains how we perceive basic shapes as identical despite various transformations. These transformations include rotation, movement, size alteration, stretching, different lighting conditions, and variations in parts. This is useful for recognizing faces, as it allows us to recognize our friends and family members from afar, from different angles, or even when they make funny faces. Pragnance. Humans have 5 senses: taste, sight, hearing, touch, and smell. For humans, this is too much information as a general rule. Therefore, humans tend to simplify complexity with something we call pragnance. Our environment constantly bombards our senses with stimuli, while we have limited attention and processing capacity to handle all the complexity. Pragnance helps us see order and regularity in a world of visual competition. You should remember that when you think you are right in your assumptions about the world. For example, we see these Olympic rings, we see 5 interlocking rings instead of Cs, and lens shapes. The circles are simpler shapes to process than the C or the lens shapes. Similarity. When items, objects, or elements share superficial characteristics, we perceive them as grouped. You see 3 groups of rows of dots: gray, blue, and gray. Symmetry and order. Which of these shapes would you group together? Chances are you'll pick the matching parenthesis instead of the mismatched parenthesis and squared bracket combination. Humans tend to see visual elements as grouped when they are arranged symmetrically. The natural world is filled with symmetry or near symmetry, and our brains tend to favor symmetrical forms. Humans are also attracted to symmetrical partners since it's an unconscious signal of efficiency. Google's homepage is symmetrical, which almost all major elements center aligned, and the 2 buttons Google Search and I'm feeling lucky nearly mirror each other. Common fate. The principle refers to the human tendency to perceive visual elements moving in the same direction or in unison as grouped. Visuals need to be moving to convey motion. Cues such as arrows and the rotation angle can indicate the direction in which the elements are perceived to move. This is another one of those simplifications your brain is doing to save energy for you, but it might be highly inaccurate of what you are seeing. So what is the purpose of these implicit patterns that we as humans make a simplified conclusion about? As energy is limited from an evolutionary perspective, your brain does everything in its power to save energy, even though you have food in the refrigerator. So the next time you are pressed with a similar situation, you will not have to burn energy by engaging your right hemisphere. Instead, you recall what is applicable by accessing your schema of the world in the left hemisphere. That is how your exposure to the world creates your world view, or as I like to call it, your mental model of your particular world, your personal Google Maps. All these feedback loops with your 5 senses, IQ, empathy, whether or not you have a liberal or conservative brain, Gestalt laws create what you call your worldview. As you grow older, the more detailed your mental model of your world becomes, and entropy and chaos decreases. Through experience and exposure, you become more mentally stable and less reactive. But around 80 years of age, the brain starts to break down again, also known as dementia. That's when chaos, entropy, and neuroticism starts to increase again in your personality. The downside of your mental model is that it saves energy for you so that you can go about referring to your mental model and not bother with changing it. It is comfortable and easy. What often happens is that you become what is known as willfully blind. But why do people refuse to accept an alternative version of the world even when they are presented with hundreds of facts? Because that means that the mental model they have built in their left hemisphere is incorrect, which throws them into chaos. Like when your partner cheats on you. It is better to accept the lie and keep living in it than have to realize that everything was wrong and have to engage the right hemisphere to reason and find new implicit patterns through Gestalt that coincides with the new facts. It takes time. just as it took time to create the model you already have. Why let go of your mental model when it will force you not to relax and to rebuild your mental model of the world during a time when you will feel emotionally unstable and anxious? That is why it's pointless to try and convince another person to change if they don't want to. Another reason why you're wasting your time with presenting facts is that if you're triggering a negative emotion, you engage the amygdala and hypothalamus in the limbic system, which literally limits their brain to only remembering things that amplify the emotion you just elicited. Only when they want to hear the information voluntarily can they disengage the limbic system and listen to all the facts you are presenting by engaging the right hemisphere where creativity and reasoning resides, along with IQ and everything else. This is also one of the reasons why people are not attracted to individuals high in eroticism or emotional instability. This is why the exposure effect, the priming effect, and the illusion-of-truth effect are so powerful for politicians and the media when they influence you, and in many cases create a false mental model in your left hemisphere.